All right. Welcome to anybody who's watching by way of YouTube to our Wednesday. Okay. Welcome to our Wednesday prayer meeting time, Bible study time here. Anybody who's watching by YouTube, we have some folks here today, and we're glad that you're joining us for this at this time, or if you come at this later on in the week, we're delighted that you are taking advantage of this opportunity to join us in Bible study. We are continuing our look at the parables of Jesus, and we'll be reading today from Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. Let me say a word to those who are watching by YouTube. If we have a Sunday night Bible study that we're not having this coming Sunday night because it is Labor Day weekend, but on Sunday nights we've been meeting and thinking about it, talking about the New Testament, looking at it from a holistic perspective, thinking about the background behind the New Testament, and talking about the books in the New Testament and how they fit together and what they're about. And so not this Sunday night, but on the 11th, we'll be meeting back for that Sunday night Bible study. We'd love for you to come and be a part of it. We do not have it on the YouTube feed. We're meeting in the parlor in these days, and so if you'd like to come and be a part of that, we're only a couple of sessions in, and you can easily pick back up where we have left off. So just want to make sure that we extend that invitation to anybody who might be watching and who might be interested in coming and being part of that. 5 o'clock on Sunday nights here at the church in the church parlor. So we are in Luke's Gospel, chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. We're calling it the parable of the rich fool, and considering the foolish ways of the rich man. And so we're going to be looking at that parable today. Luke's Gospel, one of the emphases in Luke's Gospel is on the issue of finances, the issue of riches, the issue of greed. That is one of the things you'll find coming up again and again throughout Luke's Gospel. That is certainly one of the emphases in Jesus' teaching. He warns against the love of money and tells some stories, and we see some encounters that drive home that point. This is one of the key ones, I think, in all the Gospels. It's in Luke's Gospel alone. It's not in the other Gospels, but it's a powerful witness to Jesus' teaching on the subject, and so we're going to look at it together today. It shouldn't surprise us that this is in Luke's Gospel. As I said, this is one of the emphases in Luke's Gospel in Jesus' teaching. We read the text together, beginning with verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God." The setting for the parable is an encounter. Jesus is teaching at some point, and at some point, someone in the crowd to whom he is teaching calls out to him and says, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." Jesus' response, his second response is the parable. his first response is, who made me the judge or arbitrator over you? Now, we tend to pass over that first response. We get to the parable. But it occurred to me as I was looking at this the other day that we really ought to pay more attention to that first response. Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you? This man has called out to Jesus. He recognizes him as a teacher. He recognizes him as authoritative. He certainly has seen that Jesus knows the way of God. And so he's appealing to Jesus to take care of his problem. But Jesus says, in essence, that's not my job. I'm not an arbitrator. I'm not a judge. I have come to proclaim the gospel. I think that bears looking at and thinking about for a few minutes. Jesus' refusal to be dragged into this circumstance, I think, for me, what I hear is that it's a reminder to us in the life of the church that it's not our job to take care of all the issues and needs and concerns in the world. Our concern, our focus is to be on the gospel, preaching the gospel, not on trying to fix all the world's problems. The point needs to be made, I think, because too many in the church today have embraced other missions for the church than the gospel. We have, there are a lot of good things to do. There are a lot of problems in the world. And it's easy to morph the church's mission into the mission of saving the world. And so, we have poverty all around. And, we often will have, drives to bring together goods to give to the poor. We want to end hunger. We want to end homelessness, all these things. Those are all great causes. Those are all things that we ought to be concerned about as citizens of this world. But that's not the gospel's job. When Jesus came into the world, he healed people, but he didn't heal everybody. And those people he healed still got sick and died at some point. Jesus didn't come to bring an end to the plagues of, disease, illness, infirmity. He came to proclaim the gospel. Now, we've been talking on Sunday nights about how, in the air in Israel in those days that Jesus was on earth was this great desire to throw off the Romans and to see Israel rise up in its glory, to get back to the glory days. And we've talked about how just 200 years prior to the time of Jesus, there was that great instance in which some very faithful Jews named Mattathias and Judas Maccabeus, they rose up and they threw off the rule of the Seleucid peoples in that day, the Syrians. They threw off their rule and reclaimed Jerusalem and reclaimed the temple. And Israel became independent for the first time in a long time and was powerful in those days. And so there were a lot of people who were looking for somebody to come and do that in Jesus' day. And a lot of people who thought that Jesus' messiahship should be about that very thing. And Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world." I haven't come to make Israel great again. I haven't come to set her free from Roman occupation. The gospel is about preparing people for the coming kingdom. Jesus came in saying, the kingdom of God has drawn near, repent and believe the gospel. That is, get ready for the kingdom. The kingdom is coming, judgment is coming before the kingdom is brought in, and the whole world will be judged, and all that is evil and sinful will be eradicated, and all that will be brought into the kingdom will be righteous and good. And so the work of the gospel is to bring people into right relationship with God and to put them on the path of righteousness so they can enter the kingdom when it arrives. The gospel has no notion of making this world better. The way this world gets made better is by being replaced by the world to come. And that's the bottom line. And again, it's easy for us in church life because all these other things touch our heartstrings. They move us. Who doesn't want to see homelessness and hunger end? And we should be about that work, but that's not the church's work. Our work is to focus on the gospel. As we are growing in righteousness, we will naturally make the world a better place. That's certainly true as well. If I'm a righteous person and I'm honest, and I care about others, and I've got a service orientation, all those things that I'm doing for the sake of Christ, the overflow effect is that this community will be better. Imagine if everybody in this community was honest, wasn't doing drugs, wasn't taking advantage of other people. You would have a great community. And so the natural overflow of righteousness means the community will be good, better than it is, but it will not cure all of humanity's problems. It's not our job to make this world better. Our job is to preach the gospel, to call people into the kingdom, and to look forward to that kingdom's inbreak, the coming of Christ to establish the kingdom, and to eradicate all that is evil. Anyway, I think I hear that in Jesus' refusing to be drawn into this family squabble. How easy it is for ministers, to do 100 different million things, and not to do the one thing they're called to do. How easy it is for the church to do a whole lot of things, but not to stick to the main thing it's called to do. And so we need to hear that message from time to time. We need to follow in Jesus' example here, I think. Well, back to the text. After refusing to get drawn into this family mess as a judge, Jesus turns to the crowd. This man is called out to Jesus, and Jesus has said, I'm not going to get in the middle of all that. And then he turns to the crowd, and he says, "Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." He's preaching to the crowd. But the audacious thing he's doing here, first of all, is telling the crowd, this man's motivations have to do with greed. That's kind of surprising. This is a great problem to put before the people, because everybody can identify with this. Everybody has either known somebody or has gone through it in their own family. When somebody dies and there's money to be had, boy, things get really, really nasty and ugly. It brings out the worst in people. And we know that from past experience, we've seen it. We know that this is a time when some will try to take advantage of others. And it appears in this instance that this man who is called out to Jesus for help has been taken advantage of. What did he say? "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." So we assume that he's not getting done right. That's our initial working assumption. And yet Jesus calls him greedy. So we have to kind of think about that for a second and say, Jesus must have a whole lot more knowledge about this situation than we do, number one. And certainly as the Son of God, he knows the inside scoop on everything. And it may be perhaps that he knows this man from other interactions or by some sort of reputation. In this instance, we don't know, but we assume that Jesus knows. And Jesus calls out the greed that's in this man. And so that's a neat little twist for us to take hold of. Even though he seems to be in the right, it is greed that is motivating him. That's what Jesus says. And that can happen. We can be in the right, but it can be that greed is still what's motivating us. We assume that the other brother is greedy because he won't share the inheritance with this man. So we assume that he's greedy, but Jesus says the one who is seeking justice is also greedy too. We don't know how or why, but we can assume, because Jesus does, that there is greed at work in him as well. And that just drives home the point. The lure of greed is great, and it's more insidious than we understand, and it can get in those who have a reason to plead for help, just as much as it can get in the one who is the cause of somebody needing such help. But Jesus calls him greedy. And he starts to teach the crowd about the issue of greed. He implies in those words, take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, that greed can slip into our lives from a whole host of different directions. Greed can rise up in so many different circumstances, and we can be caught up in greed in a number of ways. So he's addressing the issue of greed, the desire for riches, the desire to make one's life about getting riches, getting more stuff, getting more wealth, having more. So he's taking that issue and making it prominent in this parable. So he tells a parable, very simple, straightforward parable. There's a wealthy man who has his plantation of whatever sort it is, and he raises his crops on it every year. And one year he has a bumper crop. Now he's already a wealthy man, so we should imagine that he already has a lot of barns on that land to take care of his annual crops. This year he has more than the norm, so he has really been blessed this year. Jesus is really driving home the point. This is a man who is blessed. He has been given a lot, and he's been given even more. We all say, people will say, I don't know anything about the issue because I'm not rich. I don't have anything, and I'd like to be tested. I wish Jesus would give me more riches so that I could really demonstrate, how well I do things. Well, here's the story. Here's a man who's already rich, and he gets more. And what does he do? He becomes more greedy than he already was previously. It doesn't even occur to him that this problem is an opportunity to bless others. This is how far his heart and mind and spirit are twisted. He doesn't even consider the prospect of inviting the poor to come and take the produce off his land. That, by the way, was the Jewish way. Go back to the story of Ruth, Boaz. Ruth and Naomi are poor. They are destitute. Ruth goes into the fields to glean the crops. That's the way that the Jewish people provided for those without. As they harvested their crops, they would leave in the field portions of the crops for the poor to come and take and gather to themselves. This man should have just had a big party and said, everybody come and take what you want. God has blessed me, and I want to bless you. No. This man proves the old adage, the more that you have, the more that you want. Once your heart is possessed by possessions, it never stops wanting more. And so his only concern, what am I going to do? I know what I'll do. I'll build bigger barns. And then I can put them in there, and then I'm going to store up all this stuff, and I'll be able to take care of myself. I won't have to work anymore. Not that he's been doing any work, by the way. But I can just relax and take it easy. His mind is twisted. His heart is twisted. His spirit is twisted. He really is, he really does think that life consists of an abundance of possessions. Jesus, again, throughout the Gospels, teaches against the lure of riches. And there are basically three things that he says, three things that he outlines in all his teachings that are dangerous about possessions. The first one is that our possessions become our gods. Instead of serving Almighty God, we serve our possessions. Then we think, how in the world do you do that? That sounds crazy. But instead of giving our time and attention to God and focusing on Him, we put all our time and energy into working and getting more stuff. Instead of spending time on God, we spend a lot of time trying to manage all our stuff. That's part of the problem of having a lot of stuff is you got to manage it. And that takes even more time and energy. Getting it is one thing, keeping it is the other thing. And so you spend all your time trying to get and trying to hang on to and trying to increase your abundance. And so your stuff literally becomes your God in that sense. It's getting all the attention God ought to get. But at the same time, we put our trust in our stuff. We think if I've got enough saved up for retirement, if I've got enough, enough stuff around me, then I'll be able to make it till the end. And I can live the way I want to live. I can live comfortably, or I can live extravagantly. But we put our trust in our stuff. As long as I've got enough money, I'm going to be fine. And that's the way we talk all the time. I read something the other day, was talking about, having $1 million used to be the benchmark for being prepared for retirement. And now it's something else. It's much higher than that. And so, you got to consider every contingency. Well, I might be in this nursing home, and am I going to be able to cover that? And my other things I've got to take care of, make sure that they're prepared, cared for, and all that kind of stuff. And so we have our portfolios, and we're just trying to cover every contingency. And don't hear me say that's wrong. I mean, you be prudent, be wise. Yes, whatever God gives you, certainly you ought to use it to care for yourself. But don't trust in it. Ultimately, you can't trust in it. Money can't, buy you life. And that's part of the lesson here. This guy thinks he's got everything set up, and what happens? He dies that night. So the first thing that Jesus talks about is our possessions become our God. And we put our trust and our hope in our possessions. And we think that as long as we've got enough, we'll be okay and we'll make it to the end. And we'll be able to take care of ourselves and take care of our loved ones. The second problem with having a lot of stuff is that it causes us to take advantage of others or to ignore their needs. This is what the prophets were railing against the Israelites about in the Old Testament. Micah, Amos, one of the main themes was that the people of Israel weren't taking care of the needy, the oppressed, the poor, and they were supposed to. It was built into the law of the people that they are their brother's keepers. They are to care for those who are in need. And so the love of money, turns us away from that care in two ways. Number one, we take advantage of the poor so that we can get more stuff. And that's what the prophets talked about. Amos, cheating. They would cheat the scales. They would rig the scales so that they could make money off of those who didn't have a lot. And they would have to buy stuff, and so they would fudge with the weights and therefore cheat people out of stuff. So we let the poor, we take advantage of the poor. But the other side is we don't give to them. We don't care for them. We don't extend God's mercy and bounty to them. So the love of money keeps us from living up to that calling, which is ours. The third way that riches distort things is that we oftentimes use it for illicit purposes. We use it to indulge in ungodly, sinful behaviors. Think of the prodigal son. The prodigal son, we're going to talk about him pretty soon here, but the prodigal son, demands his inheritance before his father's dead, and he gets it, and he goes out, and what does he do with it? He invests it, and he makes a lot of money, and he lives rich. No, he spends it all on sinful living. He wastes it. He uses it to indulge his desires, his sinful desires, and that happens a lot too. And we see that play out all the time. We hear of, famous sports figures, guys who grew up poor or whatever, and, they end up with all this money, and they blow it all in no time at all. And they blow it on cars. They buy cars that cost $500,000, or they buy homes that cost, $50 million. And they just, they just use it to indulge all their wants and their desires and their whims. And they end up like the prodigal son, using it for the wrong purposes. So money can become our God. Money can keep us from doing our duty to our neighbor. And money can be used for indulging our sinful impulses. And so those are the things Jesus talks about with respect to the danger of possessions. Let me stop for a second and say something, because everybody always asks these questions, in terms of caring for the poor and the needy. Do we care for all the poor and the needy? Do we care for every one of their needs and concerns and issues? Do we ever draw a line? That often comes up. And reasonably so. Not everybody who is in need should be given to every single time. The needy are just as sinful as those who have, and they oftentimes their sinfulness will be used in the service of getting more for themselves, taking advantage of those who want to give and who want to help. So, when people refuse to go work, I always point to that great Andy Griffith episode. Everything's in Andy Griffith, okay? You got the Bible, Andy Griffith, and you're in pretty good shape. That's what I say. But it's a great episode. There's this hobo kind of guy that lives out in the woods, and Opie and his men come and find him, and he uses them to go and bring food to him from their homes and all this kind of stuff. With all these tales of Robin Hood and stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, and he's got a bum leg and he can't make it, and so Andy, when Andy finds out what Opie and his guys are doing, they're stealing cakes from everybody's windows and all this kind of stuff. He realizes he's got to help them see what's going on here. And so he goes out and he says, let's go help this man, And so Andy, wants to bring him into town and get him a job and, help him find a place to live and to set up shop and to have a productive life. And of course, the guy doesn't want that. He just wants people to keep handing out stuff to him. And Andy's, line to Opie is, any self-respecting, decent human being wants to do for themselves. They don't want to have somebody else do for them. They want to be able to take care of themselves. Sometimes they need help to get to that point, but they don't want somebody else doing for them. They want to do for themselves. There's a lot of wisdom in that. And so it's a tricky subject, and there are a lot of factors involved in it, and it's more complicated than that, and yet it isn't. It's sometimes that simple, and we need to, as Paul says in one of his letters, I think it was 1 Thessalonians, he's talking about some who are taking advantage of the church. He talked in Timothy about the families that aren't taking care of their widowed parents, and he's saying, don't make the church take care of them. You take care of them. You can take care of them. You do it. And they're in the church in Thessalonica, I think it is. There's some who are taking advantage of the church's purse. They're not working when they could be working. He says, if you don't work, you don't eat. So both sides are right. Both sides are true. It's our job to care for those in need, but it's the job of everybody to take care of themselves as much as possible. And if they have needs, then yes, we try to help them out. So it's not either or, it's both and. Sometimes that just has to be said, I think. So that's the kicker in the story. The man tries to secure his life, and that night he dies. The implication in the story is that his life is taken that night as judgment against his sinful living. He has not been rich toward God. He has been rich toward himself only. To be rich toward God is to bring our abundance to God and to let him help us know how to use it to bless others. It could be in and through the ministry of the church. It can be in helping the neighbor who has a need. It could be any number of ways. Everything that we have, as I'm going to say on Sunday morning, everything that we have belongs to God. We belong to God. Our lives are his to do with as he pleases and as he directs. Our possessions are his to do with as he pleases and as he directs. And we are held accountable for that. Great teaching here, powerful teaching, straightforward, says things we already know, and yet we need to hear again and again and again and again. Anything I need to hear again from you guys about any of this, or anything new that I need to hear? Yes, Francis? So our possessions become our God. We allow our possessions when we are, possessed with possessing. We don't do our duty towards our neighbor in need. We either take advantage of that neighbor, trying to get more and more stuff, as the people in Israel were doing in the days of Amos and Micah, or we just don't do for them. We withhold our money. And we don't supply the need of those, as this man is doing. He should have used his produce to care for those around him. He had an abundance, over the top abundance, and yet he didn't even think of trying to help others. So the love of money keeps us. It makes us, it tempts us to serve the money rather than God, and it tempts us to not do. The love of money tempts us not to care for our neighbor, or take advantage of them, and then we aren't doing right by. We aren't loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. That's a good way to put it. The love of money keeps us from loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. And then the third thing is that the love of money is oftentimes used to indulge our sinful desires. The prodigal son being the prime example of that. Thank you all. See ya.